Barron Trump, the enigmatic giant of the Trump dynasty, stepped into a night that promised glamour but delivered something far wilder, something so astonishing, so hilariously unhinged, that it's already being whispered as the greatest scandal to ever erupt from a red carpet. Picture this: a dazzling movie premiere, a sea of flashing cameras, and then out of nowhere, a fanatical Zelensky supporter unleashed an outrage so explosive it turned a star-studded evening into a battlefield. What happened next was beyond anyone's wildest dreams, a twist so jaw-dropping, so drenched in controversy, that it left the world gasping. This isn't just a story, it's a roller coaster of raw emotion and unthinkable stakes, and Barron Trump stands at its white-hot center. Buckle in, because you'll be begging to know what hit him and how he hit back. The night shimmered with opulence, a grand gala premiere unfurling beneath the vaulted ceilings of an iconic Los Angeles theater, its marquee blazing with the title of a blockbuster war epic that had Hollywood buzzing. Barron Trump arrived like a force of nature, his 6'7" frame slicing through the crowd, a young titan draped in a tailored black tuxedo that hugged his lean, commanding build. His blonde hair caught the light, his blue eyes glinted with a quiet intensity that seemed to pierce the chaos around him. At just 18, he carried the Trump name like a crown, heavy, gleaming, and impossible to ignore. Cameras swarmed him, their flashes a relentless storm, as A-listers and influencers jockeyed for proximity, their chatter a symphony of admiration and envy. This wasn't just a night out for Barron. It was a rare public flex, a chance to step beyond his father's shadow and claim a spotlight of his own. The red carpet stretched like a river of crimson velvet, flanked by velvet ropes and a throng of onlookers, fans screaming his name, paparazzi barking for a pose, their voices a fevered roar that echoed off the theater's Art Deco facade. Barron moved with a predator's grace, his long strides eating up the distance, his lips curved in a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. This isn't just a story, it's a revelation. And if you want to see how far it goes, subscribe now before it disappears. He'd come to support the film, a gritty tale of heroism and sacrifice that had already sparked Oscar whispers, its premiere a magnet for the elite. The air buzzed with anticipation, the scent of expensive perfume mingling with the faint tang of popcorn wafting from the lobby. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, their light dancing across sequined gowns and polished shoes, painting the scene in a glow of decadence. But beneath the glamour lurked a shadow, a figure coiled with purpose amid the sea of spectators. Clad in a tattered gray jacket, a Ukrainian flag pin glinting on its lapel, the Zelensky fan stood apart, his wiry frame taut with tension. His face was a map of sleepless nights, sunken eyes, a scruffy beard, a mouth set in a hard line of resolve. Known in fringe online circles as Volodymyr's vanguard, he was a man possessed, his life a crusade fueled by devotion to Ukraine's leader and a hatred for anything, or anyone he deemed complicit in its struggles. His ex-posts were a torrent of venom, railing against American apathy, Trumpian excess, and tonight, Barron himself. He tracked the event for weeks, his obsession hunting into a plan to ambush the youngest Trump, to turn this glittering night into a stage for his fury. Inside, the theater pulsed with energy as guests settled into plush velvet seats, their murmurs a low hum beneath the soaring orchestral score that teased the film's opening. Barron took his place near the front, his height forcing him to slouch slightly, his presence drawing stares from rows of celebrities, directors in sleek suits, actresses in cascading gowns, all whispering about the Trump scion in their midst. The lights dimmed, the screen flickering to life with previews, and the crowd leaned forward, their excitement palpable. It was a moment of unity, a shared breath before the story unfolded, until the Zelensky fan made his move, shattering the calm like a grenade tossed into a still pond. He'd slipped past the outer barriers, his jacket concealing a rolled-up banner and a small speaker clipped to his belt, its battery humming with latent power. Security lingered near the entrances, their eyes scanning the crowd, but he was a ghost among the masses, his movements quick and deliberate. He edged closer to the theater's grand foyer, where glass doors framed the red carpet's tail end, Barron's arrival still fresh in the air. The fans' hands trembled as he unfurled his banner, a stark white sheet scrawled with blood-red letters, "Trump ignores Ukraine's blood." His speaker crackled to life, a pre-recorded rant in his own voice blaring through the fabric, its volume piercing the night. Heads turned, gasps rippled through the onlookers, and the gala's polished veneer began to crack. The sound hit the theater like a shockwave, seeping through the walls as the Zelensky fan thrust his banner high, his arms straining under its weight. His recorded voice looped, a tirade of accusations, Barron's wealth a mockery, his silence a betrayal, his family a blight on justice. Outside, the crowd fractured. Some jeered, their boos a guttural wave. Others froze, their phones snapping to life, capturing the disruption as it spiraled into chaos. Paparazzi pivoted, their lenses swinging from the stars to the fanatic, their shouts drowning in the speaker's relentless drone. Security jolted into action, their radios spitting static as they converged, but the Zelensky fan stood his ground, his eyes locked on the theater, willing Barron to feel the weight of his rage. Inside, the preview stuttered, the screen's glow faltering as the commotion bled through. Barron shifted in his seat, his head tilting toward the sound, his expression unreadable, a mask of calm that belied the storm brewing beyond the walls. The audience stirred, their whispers rising into a restless buzz, some craning their necks toward the foyer, others clutching their pearls in dismay. The film's director, a wiry man with a furrowed brow, stood, his hands clenched as if the interruption were a personal affront. But Barron remained still, his long fingers resting on the armrest, his gaze drifting to the exit, a flicker of curiosity perhaps, or something sharper, something ready to ignite. Zelensky fan's speaker screeched with feedback, the sound clawing at the air as security closed in, their shadows stretching across the red carpet. He swung the banner like a flag, its edges flapping wildly, his voice, Live Now, joining the recording in a frantic crescendo. He screamed Barron's name, the syllables a jagged blade, demanding he face the truth, face the world he'd ignored. The crowd surged, a tidal wave of bodies pressing closer, their phones a constellation of lights feeding the madness to the internet. X erupted, #Barron Blindsided trending in seconds, clips of the banner and the rant ricocheting across the globe. The theater doors rattled, the gala teetering on the edge of collapse, and Barron Trump, the night's unspoken king, sat at the heart of it all, his next move a mystery that held the world in its grip. The gala's golden glow flickered like a candle in a tempest, its elegance fraying at the edges as the Zelensky fan lingered in the shadows. Barron Trump stood rooted near his seat, his towering frame a stark silhouette against the theater's crimson curtains, his blue eyes locked on the intruder who had defied security's grasp once more. The fan's presence was a splinter in the night, a jagged, unyielding thing that refused to be smoothed over by applause or brushed aside by Barron's measured words. The air between them crackled, heavy with unspoken promises, the kind that whispered of chaos yet to unfold. The fan shifted, his tattered jacket catching the dim light, revealing a patchwork of stains, sweat, dirt, perhaps something darker, etched into the fabric like a map of his obsession. His hands twitched, clutching a crumpled piece of paper, its edges worn as if it had been folded and unfolded 1,000 times. Barron's gaze sharpened, catching the glint of determination in the man's eyes, a fire that burned hotter than the rage he'd spewed earlier. This was no mere agitator seeking a moment in the spotlight. This was a man tethered to a cause, a thread of pain woven into every fiber of his being. The crowd remained oblivious, their chatter swelling as they sipped champagne and dissected the film, but Barron felt the shift, a predator sensing the first tremor of a hunt. The theater pulsed with life, its velvet seats creaking under restless bodies, the air thick with the scent of perfume and anticipation. Crystal chandeliers cast prisms of light across the ceiling, but their beauty felt hollow now, a fragile veneer stretched over the brewing storm. Barron's pulse quickened, though his face betrayed nothing, Years of scrutiny had honed his ability to bury emotion beneath a polished exterior. He could still hear the echo of the fan's last shout, "You'll pay for it," ringing in his ears, a taunt that burrowed deeper than he cared to admit. It wasn't just an accusation, it was a challenge, a gauntlet thrown at his feet, and Barron Trump was not one to let such a thing lie unanswered. The fan took a step forward, his boots scuffing the polished floor, a sound that cut through the hum of the gala like a blade. Security hadn't noticed him yet, their attention split between the dispersing crowd and the VIPs milling near the stage. Barron's mind raced, calculating his next move. He could signal his detail, have the man dragged out again, but that would only fuel the narrative. Barron Trump, the privileged son, silencing dissent with a wave of his hand. No, he needed something bolder, something that would turn the tide in his favor without igniting the powder keg the night had become. His fingers flexed at his sides, the cool metal of his cufflinks brushing his skin, grounding him as he weighed his options. Then the fan moved, swift, purposeful, a shadow slipping through the chaos. He darted toward the stage, his crumpled paper now unfurled, revealing a photograph, its details obscured by distance but its intent clear. A weapon of revelation, not destruction. Barron's breath caught, a rare crack in his composure, as the fan reached the edge of the platform where the director still lingered, basking in the evening's applause. The crowd stirred, a ripple of confusion spreading as heads turned, eyes narrowing at the sudden intrusion. The actress from earlier, her sequins flashing like a warning signal, stood abruptly, her posture rigid with curiosity, or perhaps complicity. The fan thrust the photograph into the air, holding it aloft like a banner of his own, its image angled toward Barron. The theater's lights caught it just enough, a grainy snapshot of a younger Barron standing beside a figure cloaked in shadow, the backdrop unmistakably foreign, unmistakably fraught. Gasps punctured the air, sharp and sudden, as recognition dawned on a few faces in the crowd. Whispers erupted into a roar, phones rising like a swarm of insects, their cameras hungry for the scandal now dangling before them. Barron's jaw clenched, his mind spinning through memories, searching for the moment captured in that frame. Was it real? Manipulated? The truth mattered less than the perception, and he knew it. Security finally reacted, lunging toward the fan, but he was ready, leaping back into the crowd, using the chaos as a shield. The photograph fluttered to the stage, landing face up, a silent accusation staring up at the chandeliers. Barron's heart slammed against his ribs, his calm facade splintering as the implications crashed over him. This wasn't just about Ukraine, not anymore. It was personal, a dagger aimed at his past, his family, his very existence. The fan vanished into the throng, swallowed by the sea of bodies, but his grim smile lingered in Barron's mind, a promise carved in shadow. The director snatched the photograph from the floor, his hands trembling as he glanced at Barron, his eyes wide with questions he couldn't voice. The actress stepped forward, her lips parting as if to speak, but the roar of the crowd drowned out any chance of clarity. Barron stood motionless, the weight of 1,000 stares pressing down on him, the gala's glamour dissolving into a circus of speculation. His fingers curled into fists, nails biting into his palms, the pain a tether to his resolve. He wouldn't run, wouldn't hide, not from this, not from anything. The theater doors burst open, security flooding in, their shouts lost in the pandemonium. The fan was gone, melted into the night, but his strike had landed deep, precise, devastating. Barron's gaze swept the room, meeting eyes that flickered with doubt, accusation, intrigue. The storm he'd sensed earlier was no longer brewing. It had broken, and he was at its center. The gala staggered on, a hollow shell of its former self, but Barron knew the real battle was just beginning. Whatever that photograph held, truth or lie, it had lit a fuse, and the explosion would come, relentless and unforgiving. The Lowe's Angels night swallowed Barron Trump as he stepped out of the theater's side exit, the city's sprawling glow a stark contrast to the suffocating elegance he'd left behind. The air was cool, tinged with the faint scent of exhaust and possibility, but it did little to ease the storm churning within him. The photograph, now a crumpled weight in his jacket pocket, pulsed like a second heartbeat. A riddle he couldn't yet solve, a threat he couldn't yet name. His long strides carried him away from the gala's gilded chaos, into the labyrinth of streets where shadows stretched long and treacherous, mirroring the doubts that clawed at his mind. Behind him, the theater loomed like a monument to his unraveling, its glass doors reflecting the fractured light of a world now buzzing with his name. His phone vibrated incessantly, news alerts screaming headlines, family members demanding answers, ex-posts piling up like kindling for a fire he couldn't extinguish. Barron exposed, Trump scandal, Zelensky strike. Each hashtag was a dagger, and he knew the Zelensky fan, that phantom in a tattered jacket, had sharpened them all. But Barron didn't check the messages. Not yet. His focus was singular. Find the fan, uncover the truth, and wrest back control before the spark of that photograph ignited a blaze he couldn't contain. The actress's words echoed in his ears, sharp and cryptic. "You don't remember, do you? It's not what you think, but it's enough to destroy you if you don't act fast." Her voice had carried a weight he couldn't dismiss, her sequined silhouette aflare in the dim corridor. Was she a lifeline or another trap? The crash that had followed, those heavy, purposeful footsteps closing in, had forced his hand, driving him into the night before he could press her for more. Now, alone in the city's underbelly, he replayed her warning, searching for meaning in the haze of his own uncertainty. He turned down a narrow alley, the walls closing in with graffiti-smeared brick, the distant hum of traffic a faint pulse beneath his boots. The photograph demanded his attention, and he pulled it out again, unfolding it under the flickering glow of a street lamp. There he was, younger, slimmer, his face still soft with youth, standing beside a shadowed figure, the backdrop a desolate sprawl of rubble and smoke. Eastern Europe, maybe Ukraine, a memory tethered to his father's diplomatic shadow. The details danced just beyond reach, a half-formed picture obscured by time and secrecy. Real or fake, it didn't matter yet. The fan had wielded it like a guillotine, and the blade was already falling. Barron's jaw tight, his fingers curling around the edges of the paper. He'd been a bystander in his family's saga for too long, the quiet son watching power plays unfold from the sidelines. But this was personal. The fan had made it so. Somewhere in this city, that zealot was plotting his next move, a predator reveling in the chaos he'd unleashed. Barron could feel it. The gala was just the opening act, and the real reckoning was still to come. Meanwhile, miles away, the fan hunched over a chipped desk in a motel room that reeked of mildew and desperation. The laptop before him glowed with a digital arsenal, files, audio clips, grainy photos, all pieces of a puzzle he'd spent months assembling. His tattered jacket hung on the chair, a trophy of his anonymity, and his fingers danced across the keys with a feverish rhythm. The photograph had been his first strike, a calculated blow to pierce Barron's armor, and the gala's fallout was proof of its precision. His online followers, faceless voices in encrypted chats, cheered him on, their fervor a fuel that burned hotter with every message. Take him down, end the Trumps, show the world. But he wasn't ready to release the full deluge. Not yet. The files on his screen were a powder keg, allegations of Barron's involvement in shadowy deals, snippets of conversations lifted from forgotten corners, images that could twist the photograph narrative into something even darker. Timing was his weapon, and he savored the anticipation, knowing that each second Barron spent scrambling was a victory in itself. He leaned back, a smirk tugging at his lips, the thrill of the hunt coursing through him. The city was his chessboard, and Barron Trump was a king cornered by a pawn. Back in the alley, Barron's senses sharpened as a shadow shifted ahead, a flicker of movement too deliberate to be chance. He slowed, his height casting a long silhouette against the brick, his breath steady despite the adrenaline spiking in his veins. The actress emerged from the darkness, her sequined gown dulled by the night but her eyes alight with purpose. She followed him, her heels silent now, her presence a question mark he couldn't ignore. "You shouldn't be out here alone," she said, her voice low, cutting through the alley's stillness. "Not with what's coming." Barron's gaze narrowed, his silence a wall she'd have to breach. She stepped closer, undeterred, her expression a mix of resolve and something softer, pity maybe, or regret. "The fan, not working alone," she continued, her words measured. "That photograph, it's bait. They want you to chase it, to dig, to expose yourself. There's more worse waiting if you take the wrong step." Her warning hung between them, heavy with implication. Barron's mind raced. Who were they? The fan's followers, his father's enemies, or something deeper, a conspiracy woven into the fabric of his family's legacy? The actress held his stare, unflinching, and for a moment he saw past her calculated poise to a flicker of fear. She knew more, too much, and she was risking something by being here. Before he could press her, a low rumble echoed from the alley's mouth, tires on asphalt, slow and deliberate. Headlights flared, pinning them in their glare, and Barron's instincts kicked in. He grabbed the actress's arm, pulling her behind a dumpster as a black SUV crept into view. The windows were tinted, the engine idling with menace. Security, the fan's allies, or someone else entirely? Barron's pulse hammered, but his face remained a mask, calm, controlled, a fortress against the unknown. "You felt that, didn't you? That was no ordinary moment. If it hit you, hit like, and let's keep going." The actress pressed against him, her breath quickening. "They've found you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the engine's growl. "You're out of time." The SUV stopped, doors clicking open and heavy boots hit the ground. Barron's grip tightened on the photograph, its edges biting into his palm. The night had turned predator, and he was no longer just a target, he was prey. But Barron Trump had been forged in fire, shaped by a life of scrutiny and survival. Whatever came next, he'd face it head-on, ready to reclaim the narrative or burn it all down trying. The city's shadows deepened, the stakes rising with every heartbeat. The reckoning was here, and Barron knew one thing for certain: the fight had only just begun. The alley faded into a blur of shadows as Barron moved swiftly, his pulse pounding in his ears. The shouts behind him grew fainter, swallowed by the night, but the weight of the actress's sacrifice or betrayal pressed heavily on his mind. Natalia, she'd called herself. A name that now carried too many questions and not enough answers. Had she truly turned against her former allies, or was this an elaborate trap to lure him deeper into the fan's web? He couldn't afford to dwell on it. Not now. The Zelensky fan was close. He could feel it, and every step brought him nearer to the reckoning he'd been chasing since that damned photograph surfaced. The alley opened into a deserted street, lined with shuttered storefronts and flickering streetlights. Barron paused, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. The air was thick with the scent of damp concrete and exhaust, a faint chill biting at his skin. He needed to think like the fan, erratic, obsessive, but cunning. If Natalia was right, this wasn't just a personal vendetta. It was a calculated strike against his family's legacy. Documents, recordings, she'd hinted at evidence that could unravel everything his father had built. The thought ignited a cold fury in him, but he tamped it down. Anger was a luxury, precision was a necessity. A distant hum caught his attention, a low, mechanical drone that didn't belong in the stillness. He pressed himself against the brick wall of a boarded-up pawn shop, peering around the corner. 2 blocks away, a warehouse loomed, its rusted facade illuminated by a single floodlight. A black van idled near the loading dock, its exhaust curling into the air. Figures moved in and out of the building, their silhouettes sharp and purposeful. This was no random hideout. It was a base. Barron's mind clicked through the possibilities. The fan could be inside, orchestrating the next move, or this could be a staging ground for his allies. Either way, it was the strongest lead he had. He slipped his hand into his jacket, feeling the reassuring weight of the compact pistol holstered there. He wasn't a man who sought violence, but he'd learned early that power came with enemies, and enemies didn't negotiate with weakness. He crept closer, sticking to the shadows, his footsteps silent against the cracked pavement. The van's rear doors were open, revealing crates stacked haphazardly within. One of the figures, a wiry man with a shaved head, leaned against the vehicle, barking orders into a walkie-talkie. "Hurry it up. He wants this done tonight." The fan, Barron's jaw tightened. He was in the right place. The warehouse door swung open again and a woman stepped out, her face partially obscured by a hood. She carried a laptop under one arm, her movements brisk. Barron's eyes narrowed. She didn't fit the profile of the muscle he'd seen so far, too composed, too deliberate. An operative, maybe. Someone handling the fan's evidence. If he could get to her, he might cut this operation off at the knees. He edged along the perimeter, using a row of overflowing trash bins as cover. The woman approached the van, handing the laptop to the wiry man. "It's encrypted," she said, her voice clipped. "Tell him the upload's ready once he gives the word." Upload? Barron's stomach twisted. Whatever they had, those documents, those recordings, they were about to go public. He had minutes, maybe less, to stop it. He weighed his options. A direct assault was risky. He was outnumbered and the noise would draw attention. Stealth was his best shot. The loading dock was 20 yards away, its shadows deep enough to conceal his approach. If he could slip inside, find the fan, and neutralize the threat before the upload began, he might still salvage this. Decision made, he darted across the open space, his long strides eating up the distance. He reached the dock and flattened himself against the wall, listening. The hum of machinery vibrated through the metal, punctuated by muffled voices. He eased the pistol from its holster, his grip steady, and slipped through the half-open door. Inside, the warehouse was a cavern of rust and dust, its high ceiling lost in darkness. Crates and tarps littered the floor, creating a maze of obstacles. A makeshift command center occupied the far corner, folding tables lined with monitors, cables snaking across the concrete. And there, hunched over a screen, was the fan. Barron recognized him instantly, the wild hair, the feverish glint in his eyes. The man who'd turned a single photograph into a weapon. He was muttering to himself, fingers flying across a keyboard, oblivious to the shadow creeping closer. Barron raised the pistol, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Step away from the computer, now." The fan froze, his head snapping up. For a moment their eyes locked, Barron's icy calm meeting the fan's manic intensity. Then the man smiled, a slow, unhinged grin that sent a chill down Barron's spine. "You're too late," the fan said, his voice dripping with triumph. "It's already started." The screen behind him flared to life, a progress bar ticking upward. Upload 10%, 11%, 12%. Barron Trump stood in the deserted industrial park, his back pressed against the cold chain-link fence, his breath fogging in the night air. The crushed modem lay in pieces at his feet, its faint blinking light extinguished under the force of his fist. His phone, still clutched in his other hand, buzzed faintly with the echo of that anonymous message. "You can't run forever. The truth will find you." The words gnawed at him, a persistent thorn in his mind, but he forced himself to focus. He'd escaped the warehouse, outrun the hooded figures and their bullets, but the danger was far from over. The fans' mocking revelation, backups, dozens of them, meant the upload wasn't dead, only delayed. And now someone knew exactly where he was. He shoved the phone into his pocket, his sharp blue eyes scanning the maze of steel and concrete around him. The industrial park was a sprawl of abandoned factories and rusted silos, their silhouettes jagged against the moonless sky. Silence pressed in, broken only by the distant hum of a generator and the faint rustle of wind through the weeds. He couldn't stay here. Exposed, alone, and without a clear next move, he was a target. But running blind wasn't an option either. He needed a plan, a way to turn this ambush into an advantage. Barron's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the night. The fan had been too confident, too prepared. The laptop, the modem, the coordinated attack, all signs of a larger operation. This wasn't just some lone zealot with a grudge against the Trump family. Someone bigger was pulling the strings, someone with resources and reach. The photograph he'd seen earlier, the actress's cryptic warning about Ukraine's blood, the documents the fan claimed would expose his father's deals. It all pointed to a conspiracy that stretched beyond personal vendettas. But how much was true, and how much was a weaponized lie. He flexed his hand, the ache from crushing the modem grounding him. The device was useless now, but it had been his lifeline, a tangible piece of the puzzle. If he could have kept it intact, gotten it to someone with the skills to decrypt its data, he might have uncovered the scope of the threat. Too late for that now. His only lead was the fans' taunts and the shadowy figures who chased him into the night. They'd come prepared, which meant they'd anticipated his moves. That realization tightened the knot in his stomach. He wasn't just hunted, he was being played. A faint sound snapped him out of his thoughts, a low rumble growing louder. Headlights pierced the darkness at the edge of the park, twin beams sweeping across the cracked asphalt. Barron ducked lower, his body tensing as he peered through the fence. A black SUV rolled into view, its tires crunching over gravel. It slowed near a cluster of shipping containers, then stopped. Two figures stepped out, their outlines bulky with gear. No hoods this time, but their movements were deliberate, professional. They weren't the fans' ragtag crew. These were operatives, trained and efficient. Barron's grip tightened on the pistol he'd kept from the warehouse. 8 rounds left, maybe 9. Enough to fend off a small group, but not a sustained fight. He watched as one of the figures pulled a device from the SUV, a handheld scanner, its green light pulsing as it swept the area. They were tracking him. The phone. It had to be the phone. He cursed it under his breath, yanking it from his pocket. The screen glowed faintly, the unknown message still displayed. He powered it off, but the damage was done. They'd already pinged his location. The scanner beeped, and the operatives turned toward his position, their pace quickening. Barron's options narrowed to a razor's edge, fight or flight. Fighting meant revealing himself, risking everything on a slim chance of taking them down. Running meant staying ahead, buying time to figure out who was behind this and how to strike back. He chose the latter. Shadows were his domain, and he'd use them. He slipped along the fence, keeping low, his long strides silent against the pavement. The operatives were closing in, their flashlight beams slicing through the dark. He darted behind a rusted dumpster, then cut across an open stretch to a crumbling warehouse wall. A broken window gaped above him, just within reach. He holstered the pistol, gripped the jagged frame, and hauled himself up, ignoring the sting of glass against his palms. He dropped inside, landing in a crouch on a dusty concrete floor. The warehouse was a cavern of shadows, littered with forgotten machinery and stacks of rotting crates. Barron moved quickly, weaving through the debris toward the far side. He needed distance, a way to lose the signal entirely. The operatives' voices carried faintly through the window, clipped commands, no panic. They were methodical, which made them dangerous. He reached a back exit, its door hanging off its hinges, and slipped into another alley. The industrial park stretched out before him, a labyrinth of dead ends and hiding spots. He could keep moving, stay ahead, but the phone was a liability he couldn't ignore. He pulled it out again, weighing it in his hand. Smashing it would cut him off from any potential allies, but leaving it intact risked leading them straight to him. He compromised, pried open the back, yanked out the battery, and tossed the pieces into a stagnant puddle. Let them track that. The rumble of the SUV grew louder, its headlights flashing through the gaps in the buildings. Barron pressed himself against a wall, his breath steadying. He'd bought himself a window, but it wouldn't last. The fans' words echoed in his mind. There are backups. You can't stop the truth. If the upload resumed, if those files went public, the fallout would be catastrophic, not just for him, but for his family, their legacy, everything they'd built. He couldn't let that happen. Not without knowing what he was up against. A new sound cut through the night, a sharp mechanical whir overhead. Barron glanced up, his pulse spiking. A drone, its red lights blinking as it hovered above the park. They weren't just tracking him on the ground, they had eyes in the sky. The stakes had just climbed higher, and his margin for error shrank to nothing. He broke into a sprint, heading for the densest cluster of buildings, where the drone's line of sight would falter. His mind churned with questions. Who had the resources for this? Who hated his family enough to orchestrate it? And why now? The answers were out there, buried in the files the fan had tried to release. Barron vowed to find them, to turn this hunt into his own offensive. He ducked into a narrow corridor. The drones were fatting slightly. His chest heaved, but his resolve hardened. They thought they had him cornered, outmatched. They were wrong. Barron Trump didn't just survive, he adapted, he fought, he won. The industrial park was his battlefield now, and he'd use every inch of it to stay alive. The chase was on, and this time, he'd be the one setting the trap. Barron Trump stood at the edge of the industrial park, the city's skyline a jagged silhouette against the breaking dawn. The crushed modem lay behind him, its shattered pieces a testament to the night's chaos, confrontations, revelations, and a chase that had pushed him to his limits. His breath steadied, the cold air biting at his lungs, but his mind was alight with purpose. The photograph, the Zelensky fan, the weight of his family's name, it had all collided in a single, defining moment. And now, as the first rays of sunlight pierced the horizon, Barron knew he couldn't retreat into the shadows of his father's legacy. This was his fight now. His phone buzzed again, but he silenced it without looking. The call with his father had been a breaking point, a tense exchange that crystallized his resolve. Donald Trump's voice still echoed in his ears. "You're a Trump, that means something." It did, but not in the way his father intended. Barron wasn't running from his name, he was redefining it, forging a path that was his own. The crushed modem glinted faintly in the growing light, a symbol of the past he'd left behind. He turned away, his long strides carrying him toward the city, each step a declaration of independence. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit motel room on the city's outskirts, the Zelensky fan sat motionless, his laptop closed on the table before him. The screen's glow was gone, but the weight of his decision lingered. The file's months of work, a meticulously crafted deepfake photograph meant to unravel the Trump dynasty, remained unpublished, locked away in the machine's memory. His fingers still trembled from the moment he'd pulled back from the brink, the upload bar frozen at 99%. Barron's words had pierced through his obsession. "You're fighting a ghost, the war over." He'd built his crusade on righteousness, a devotion to Ukraine's cause that had morphed into something darker, more personal. The photograph, a fabricated image of Barron in a compromising moment, was meant to be his trump card, a spark to ignite global outrage. But Barron's unflinching defiance, his calm in the face of chaos, had shaken the fans' certainty. Was this justice, or just another lie in a world drowning in them? He stood, slipping on his tattered jacket, the Ukrainian flag pin catching the faint light. He wouldn't publish, not yet. Instead, he'd watch, wait, and see what Barron did with the fire he'd lit. The night had changed them both. Barron reached the city's edge as the streets began to stir, the hum of morning traffic rising like a pulse. His mind churned with the truth he'd uncovered. The photograph was a deepfake, a lie woven from pixels and malice, confirmed by Natalia's hurried confession before the operatives descended. It hadn't been real, but its impact had been, sparking a chase, forcing him to confront the fan and exposing the fragility of perception in a world where truth was a weapon. He could still see the image in his mind, a younger version of himself, caught in a moment that never happened, a story that could have destroyed his family's name. But destruction wasn't his goal. Barron paused on a bridge overlooking the river, the water reflecting the dawn's fiery hues. He survived the night, outwitted the fan, and emerged not as a victim but as a player in his own right. The Trump name had given him a platform, but it was his actions that would define it. He pulled out his phone, ignoring the missed calls, and opened a blank message. His fingers moved swiftly, drafting a statement. Not to his father, not to the family's PR team, but to the world. "Last night I faced a lie designed to break me. It didn't. The photograph is fake, a deep fake meant to manipulate and divide. But the real threat isn't one image, it's the war on truth itself. I'm stepping up to fight it, not as my father's son, but as my own man. Stay tuned." He hit send, posting it to a public channel tied to his rarely used account. Within minutes, the notifications exploded, retweets, comments, a tidal wave of reactions crashing in. Barron silenced the phone again, slipping it back into his pocket. The media would frenzy, pundits would speculate, and his family would demand answers, but he was ready. This wasn't about defense, it was about offense, a campaign against misinformation, a cause he'd make his own. Across the city, the Zelensky fan stood on a rooftop, the wind tugging at his jacket as he scrolled through his phone. Barron's post stared back at him, bold and unapologetic. A faint smile tugged at his lips, not of triumph, but of recognition. The kid had guts, turning the tables in a way the fan hadn't expected. He pocketed his device, his gaze drifting to the horizon. The files were still his ace, a weapon he could unleash if Barron faltered, but for now, he'd let the game play out. The photograph had been a spark, but Barron was fanning it into something bigger, something neither of them could control. He adjusted the pin on his lapel, a quiet nod to the cause that still burned in him, and disappeared into the stairwell. The city sprawled below, a battlefield of narratives, and he'd be watching from the shadows. Barron had won the night, but the war was far from over. They'd cross paths again, allies or enemies, and when they did, the stakes would be higher than ever. Barron crossed the bridge, the city's heartbeat syncing with his own. The dawn painted the skyline in gold, a new day breaking over a world he was ready to challenge. He wasn't just Donald Trump's son anymore. He was Barron Trump, a name that would stand for something new. The fan was out there, the files a lingering threat, but he welcomed it. Let them come. He'd face the lies, the shadows, and the reckonings ahead, not with fear, but with fire. The camera lingered on him for a moment, his silhouette sharp against the rising sun, then panned to the city below, a restless giant waking to a story that was only beginning. If you enjoyed this story, there's another video on screen right now. Go ahead and give it a look for an even more astonishing tale. And don't forget, we'll have many more uplifting and dramatic stories coming your way. So make sure you subscribe to our channel, that way you'll never miss our newest uploads.